I'm going to share with you a few statistics because I want you to understand my world. It's a cottage industry with a big impact. There are no more than around 80,000 people who actually work in advertising agencies in the US. 10% are Latinos, 2% are Asians, and 1% are African Americans. Now, let me tell you, I've always wanted to be one of the 1%ers, but I really wasn't thinking along these lines. So, as I started to think through 25 years of being dedicated to this business, I thought, why did I get into it? I started because I wanted to be in one of the culture businesses, and I grew up with Mary Richards. Remember Mary Richards and Mary Tyler Moore? She was actually one of my idols. Okay, yes, she was a white woman, but that was what I had to work with, and she was one of those. The song said she could have it all, and so of course that's exactly what I wanted. And then I found out how much journalists, remember she was a broadcast journalist, and I found out how much journalists actually made, so I decided to go into advertising. It just seemed like a better choice. Now, I didn't really think about what that would mean. Advertising's been struggling with the issue of diversity since I got into it, and it is still struggling with diversity and with trying to reflect the culture that it spends its time talking to. And somehow, I'm still here. In fact, Advertising Week, they had an Advertising Week panel called, "Where are all the black people?" And I kept saying, I'm right here. I'm here. Not to worry, I'm still here, I'm still hanging. And so one of the things that I have learned in this 25 years is that I cannot control the way the world responds to me, but I can control the way I respond to the world. All right, that's just one insight that I've learned in terms of, in my trajectory of poking these holes in the glass ceiling and trying to avoid the fallout. I am in control of how I respond to the world. Now I'm going to tell you another little story. When I first got into my big advertising job in Chicago, I was working with a very large agency. I was a media planner buyer, and I was on a sausage account. And I was working with an African-American account supervisor. This is a general market agency. And we were talking to the client. We had not met the client. We had a conference call. And because, you never let really that junior people actually get FaceTime with clients. You just have to do it over conference calls. The sausage company at that time had a significant African-American consumer base. And we were developing a radio spot for black radio at the time. So we're playing the spot on the conference call. And the client says, "Is that on that spot?" I was a young kid. I looked at the account supervisor. What did he just say? And the account supervisor said, "Well, the voiceover talent is black." "Well, I can't have a nigger on that spot." Whoa, said it again. I'm like, okay, this is pretty interesting. And the account supervisor said, "Well, here's the thing. We're developing this for black radio. You've got a significant black consumer base, and we feel that this is the appropriate way to go about advocating your brand." And he went on and very smooth, talking about it very smoothly. And the client bought off on it. I was just flabbergasted. But what he taught me, and I'm going to tell you the name of this guy because I still admire him, and now he's, I think, in charge of global brand insights for McDonald's. And this is Kevin Newell. If any of you know him, he's a fantastic guy, and I just admire him to pieces for this. And what he taught me was, don't let a moment sideline you. And those moments can come from anywhere. This is a complicated world of diversity, and you have sometimes your enemies are not necessarily as apparent as they used to be back in the day when my father was coming up. You've got a lot of frenemies, and quite frankly, you have a lot of idiots. And you're going to run into them all the time, right? So it's the idiots that'll get you down, really, every single day. So don't let a moment sideline you. And that's what I learned from him, and that was a great insight. And it's still something that, quite frankly, I struggle with even today, because my business can be a soul-wearing, pride-swallowing enterprise. So you really have to think through, am I going to let that derail me? Assume positive intent. One of my next encounters, I was talking to a national sales manager. I was buying national media. And again, very much a phone relationship. You don't typically meet these folks until you get into it. And so I was buying for another product that also had a significant African-American consumer base. And I wanted to buy the news. I was actually buying the news in Baltimore. And he said to me, well, you know, Lauren, black people don't watch the news. Now, there are those moments when you could either go, right? You know what you could do? You could take the low road and feel really good about it, okay? And feel really good about it. Or you can take the high road and actually feel even better about that. So I sat there and I thought about it, because I have to tell you, the low road is really attractive at those moments. And I said, well, you know, I'm black and I watch the news. So I have to feel that other black people watch the news rather than just me. And he said, are you going to be in your office for the next 15 minutes? And I said, yes, I will. 5 minutes later, I had a dozen roses on my desk, and 10 minutes later, he's sitting in front of me apologizing. Now, I assumed positive intent because he didn't know who I was, and he didn't know what I was, and quite frankly, whatever he was thinking in his line of thinking, he thought he was giving me the advice I needed to have. Whether he meant positive intent or whether he didn't really was immaterial. Because I assumed positive intent, it changed the entire structure of our conversation. It changed the entire structure of our relationship. And as a result, not only did I get better deals from him in the future, I actually got lunch at the Palm once a month for years. Okay, so assuming positive intent can be a win-win and get you some serious lobsters from the Palm. It's always look for the added value. I'm still an advertising person. Every opportunity is a chance to enhance your brand. Every opportunity. I was, when I started to become more senior in this business, I started to get opportunities to pitch for new business. What's interesting about the advertising business is that on the client side, they've been much more effective at diversity management. There tend to be, and I would say in the 80-plus pitches I've been on, the vast majority of them have people of color, but they also have at least 50% or more women on the leadership team making the decision about the pitch. That is not the case on the advertising side. For the most part, it's still dominated at the senior levels by white men. This being the case, it tends to kind of interrupt the whole chemistry meeting when you have all these women making the decision about an agency sitting across from all of these guys, white guys, pitching the business. So we were in this dilemma, and one of the creative directors said, well, you know what, we need to get boobs in the room. But I was astonished by this comment, and by that, and that was the way I got onto this pitch team. But by the time that pitch was finished, those guys started to think of me as the brains in the room. And I started being requested to be on more pitches because of my intelligence and not my gender. Because I took advantage of that opportunity to show my intelligence in these pitches, to the point where now people say, why isn't Lauren on this pitch? Why isn't she having, now I'm training other people to be the intelligence in the room, regardless of whether they have boobs or not. So that was a chance to enhance my brand, an opportunity that I took and built on. So every opportunity that you get, while it can be off-putting, is a chance to really enhance your brand. Take it. This deepen your equity, understand your core competency, and deepen your equity, and expand your relevance is actually a cornerstone of the way Martin attacks brands. We talk about identifying your core competency, and sometimes your core competency is something that other people don't know about, but that's a real strength for you, and you need to let other people know about it. Let me give you an example. When I left academia and I got back into the ad industry, I went into strategic planning, and at that time it was a relatively new discipline. And everybody it was a British discipline, a British import, and it was very qualitative, very touchy-feely, very much out doing ethnographies and taking pictures of people in parks and all kinds of stuff. And I went along because I wanted to be a strategic planner and I wanted to learn this, so it was very qualitative. Now the irony is, I had this core competency in advanced statistics and analytics that I basically buried because at that time they just thought of me as a pinhead. So I said, okay, I'm going to be this qualitative planner. The funny thing about it is that I just became like every other planner. I was just one among thousands of other planners fighting for jobs, fighting for great accounts. And I realized there was an opportunity when data started to become more important, when we started to see, we were able to manipulate it more, when we started to get more, better computing power, that I really had a core competency that differentiated me from the rest of the pack. So I started working that way. I started gaining insights from data to write briefs, to help my clients build their brands better. And as a result, I was asked by Martin to develop consumer forensics and then ultimately Martin Decision Sciences. So now I have a core competency that is something that, quite frankly, if I wasn't there, they wouldn't have. They got plenty of other planners. And so for me, that was a way of deepening my equity and expanding my relevance, something that differentiates you within the group, or within that area of discipline that you're working in, is a critical piece to managing your brand. Because at the end of the day, if you have something that nobody else can do, it really doesn't matter what color you are, what gender you are, what you do when you're not at work, because they need that offering. They need that competency. So I found that's another way that I end up managing my brand in this strange and bizarre world of advertising. As a segue to that, experience is good, but expertise is better. You know, I work and have worked with a lot of people who have great work ethics, right? You've met those people. They work all the time. They get it done. They're getting the projects done. They're moving through it. What's interesting to me is how few people have a great learning ethic. I have a Ph.D., and I'm always going back to school. My mother is so frustrated. She's like, aren't you going to ever stop going back to school? And the answer is no. Because having a great learning ethic means you grow in your expertise. You grow in that thing that just isn't that easily replaced. There are a lot of people with years of experience, but in the world that I live in, where digital is coming on the scene, where data is now, big data and small data and all data in between has become so important, you've got a lot of young people who don't have years of experience, but they have deep expertise in these areas that make them highly sought after. Well, I can't let these little youngsters, millennials, take my job. So you know what? I continue to go back to school. I continue to learn. I go off on weekends I'll never get back to make sure that I deepen my expertise and stay relevant. The last point is one my brother has told me for years, especially when I get whiny about my job or my situation or what have you. And I will say it's contrarian advice when you look at a lot of the books, and there are tons of books out there on personal branding. And there are actually a lot of books out there that I've read in preparation for this that are about personal branding from a diversity perspective. And many of them will say, you know, you got to stick to it. Too many minorities will leave a business too early because they get frustrated. And I think that advice is not bad, but I have an alternative view. And that is, there are also companies out there that do get it. When I first started interviewing with the Martin Agency, I actually interviewed at 8 other agencies. And I was interested in somebody who was going to take an interest in my career and help champion me as a leader in an agency. I was a good planner, but this is about becoming an agency leader and an agency manager. And I needed to be groomed. I needed somebody to take an interest and push me along. I was shocked when I said this. I was shocked that all these chief strategy officers that I talked to said, that's not my job. I couldn't believe it. But they said, that's not my job. Literally that straight up. Except for Earl Cox, he's the chief strategy officer at the Martin Agency. He turned around and said, that's absolutely my job. My job is to make you guys stars. Wow, he got it. It was interesting, about 2 or 3 years later after I had started consumer forensics, Earl and I were at a conference. And we met one of the chief strategy officers who said, that's not my job. And it was unfortunate that his agency, who had been high-flying for quite some time, was kind of on the skids. And he came over to Earl, and he said, both Earl and myself, where we usually are at conferences, at the bar. And he said to Earl, I made a mistake not hiring her. And Earl said, yes, I know. It was pretty funny. I was like, let's have another beer. And I think at that time, this guy realized that he hadn't gotten it, but that Earl did get it, and that it was one of his key competitors that got it. All right, the key here is there are people out there now. This is second generation identity politics in corporate America. There are people out there that get it. It's not like it was when my father was growing up, where, you know, if you found that company or that organization that got it, you stayed. And you stayed for 15, 20, 30 years. If you are in a situation where you feel that you're now bumping up against the ceiling, or there aren't enough holes that you've poked that you can poke in that glass ceiling, you know what? It takes a lot of courage to stay under those conditions. So don't get me wrong. It takes a lot of courage to stay under those conditions. But I think you can also find the courage to walk off the lot. I think there are plenty of other people out there now that do get it, and great opportunities. And so my brother said, you know, you have that choice like they have that choice. You can buy the car or walk off the lot. So that was another key insight, and one that I feel is, again, contrarian advice, but something that I think is very important to remember as you continue to manage your brand for the future. Now, in closing, I'm going to say this. These are insights. They're not answers. They're things that I've learned in this quirky, weird world of advertising, and hopefully they're insights that are meaningful and actionable for you. What I will say is I don't have any hard and fast answers. What I found, and I don't know how many of you are movie buffs, but if you haven't seen Kill Bill, see Kill Bill. Okay, Quentin Tarantino is a master. And my favorite scene is when Beatrix Kiddo has just fought off 2 waves of Yakuza ninjas. And she's standing in front of her archenemy, Oshirin, and she's exhausted. She's bloodied, she's sweaty, she's exhausted. And she hears the motorcycles of the next wave coming in. And I feel her pain. She goes, and Oshirin says, you didn't think it was going to be that easy, did you? And Beatrix Kiddo says, you know, for a second there, yeah, I kind of did.